The lovely way to welcome people in. Hello. Welcome to the session, Cultivating Conversations about the Capstone Experience. We have two speakers with us today, and they're going to encourage you to use the discussion forum as well as possibly the live Q&A. So because we have a short amount of time, I'm going to turn it over to them.
So welcome everyone to this session called Cultivating Conversations about the Capstone Experience. I'm Liv Anderson. I'm one of the presenters today, or facilitators today. And I first want to point out that this work is a collaborative project with 5 different individuals across 5 different institutions. And you can see that laid out on the slide here. Myself, along with Caroline Boswell, will be presenting today on this work. So today our plan is to just give an overview of the work that we have been doing, specifically on faculty experiences of capstones. After that, we're going to introduce you to a case study, which will be the basis of conversation in smaller groups in breakout rooms. And then after that, we'll do a larger group share out and have some time throughout for question and answers. And so this work is focused on exploring capstone experiences from the faculty perspective. So capstone experiences are identified as one of the high impact practices, indicating that capstones allow students to be actively engaged in the learning process. And so capstones in particular, they are meant for students to integrate their knowledge that they've accumulated over the course of their training. And ultimately, it will culminate into some sort of product that they will be able to show. So there's been evaluation of student perceptions of capstones in terms of their usefulness for the institution or even programmatic level implementation of them. But the understanding of the faculty experiences of designing and teaching capstones is limited. And so our work on faculty experiences with capstones, this was initiated with a 3-year seminar that was facilitated by Elon University, specifically through their Center for Engaged Learning. This seminar brought faculty, it brought academic developers and others together to explore many aspects of capstones, but we were in particular, our team in particular was interested in the faculty experiences. So we first collected data through a multi-institutional survey, and capstone instructors were the respondents. And that survey focused on questions pertaining to how prepared capstone instructors felt to teach their capstone, also what types of support or resources that were available to them to develop, implement, and teach their capstones. So following the survey, we also conducted semi-structured interviews that focused on the same concepts. And the survey data was analyzed quantitatively, and the interview transcripts were reviewed with elements of grounded theory by identifying themes and sub-themes. And so the survey made it very clear that resources were important to support capstone development and teaching, yet they were lacking across capstone instructors. And so, of course, we were able to dig into that a little bit deeper in the interviews with capstone instructors. So as we looked into the transcripts of those interviews, we found that one sub-theme that came out from resources, a main theme that we found was resources, a sub-theme from that was conversations. So we were able to further isolate text in those transcripts surrounding conversations to learn more about what capstone instructors were experiencing surrounding that sub-theme in particular, the conversations. And so what came pretty apparent pretty quickly was that there were intersecting conversations that were happening. So meaning that instructors were having conversations with different types of colleagues, and those different types of colleagues would elicit different types of conversations. So for example, if a capstone instructor was talking to a department chair, Perhaps that conversation would be pertaining to how the capstone fit into the program, or how teaching that capstone plays into their tenure and promotion. If a capstone instructor is having a conversation with an academic developer, perhaps they're talking about assessment or evaluation methods to determine whether that capstone is actually indeed high impact, a high impact practice. And maybe that capstone instructor is talking to different colleagues. Maybe they're talking about how the capstone itself fits into the flow of the rest of the curriculum. And other things that frequently came up.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, let's see. Bear with us, folks. Let's see if I can. Okay, is that showing up? No problem. Okay, great. Hopefully Liv will make it back to us. Okay, so Liv was left off talking about how, one of the things that's probably pretty self-evident, but also emerged within our research is that there are a lot of kind of contingencies, right? So that our research, first of all, it's for 5 specific institutions. They're all predominantly white institutions in the United States. And so that's something that we want people to keep in mind. But then also kind of the person's experience or relationship to the capstone and sort of the resources they need can be dependent on different parts of their kind of social identities, whether it be their gender identity, racial or ethnic identity, their status, experience, discipline, and of course the culture of their institution, but also the contextual culture of their department matters pretty substantively as well. And so we do want to make sure it's transparent that, that all of that context is pretty important. Yes, and also the role of the capstone, right? So in some institutions that were part of our study, the capstone is an institutional requirement. And then at other institutions that were part of our study, it is not. It's a programmatic requirement that some programs have and others do not. And so as Liv was mentioning, one of the things that emerged was that there were conversations going on at places, but that was actually one of the greatest needs articulated. So for example, in our quantitative survey, we found that faculty prized their colleagues and department chairs the most important resource to their development of a capstone experience. So more than any, like even release time and instructional design support, it was the most important resource with their colleagues. But one of the things we saw in the qualitative interviews was that often the conversations they wanted to be having with their colleagues were not happening, right? And so there are a substantive amount of resources to support people in the development of capstones generally within their disciplinary context, depending on the discipline. But one of the things that we were struggling to find were resources to help people provoke the conversations they needed to ensure that the capstone was actually running successfully, and that the people who were charged with implementing it felt supported and understood kind of the relationship of their work to the capstone, but also the capstone to the larger program or even institutional requirement. And so one of the things that we did as a result is we've drafted a series of heuristic questions that emerged from this study, right? Questions that we think people should be asking themselves, other capstone stakeholders, And so what we really wanted to do today, and we have a kind of a small group here, so I think we really, we could go into one breakout room because then we can actually hear you all, is we can choose one of these lists of heuristics and we can talk about which questions we do think would be most pressing based on a case study that we'll share with you. The case study is fictional, but it is based on kind of amalgamation of our research. We contextualize it to the UW system simply because the UW system has high impact practices initiative. So we thought that would make sense. But what we want to do is share with you the list of the heuristic questions that we've developed to get your perspective on the questions that you think would be most pressing for this case study, to think about how a person would actually engage in those questions, right? Whether it be internal reflection, whether they be formal or formalized conversations with their peers. And so that's kind of our plan going ahead. So here's the case study, and you could probably read it, or I'm going to go ahead and read it myself just to make sure we're on the same page. Again, this is a fictional case study, but it is an amalgamation of some research we've had. A year ago, your university created a task force to examine the state of the capstone. Influenced by the UW Systems initiative to promote equity-minded high-impact practices for all students, administrators charged the task force with creating a vision for the capstone requirement that aligns with the American Association of Colleges and Universities definition of a capstone experience, and the research that articulates the characteristics of high-impact, equitable, culminating experiences. The university approved the task force finding and created a revised capstone requirement as part of its core curriculum. So, Liv's back. All right. So this is kind of the context, right? So potentially your institution already had some form of a capstone requirement, but they've decided to reinvestigate it because they want to make sure it's in alignment with the research and alignment with best practices. And so our case study is asking us to think about, well, what does that look like? What kind of resources and supports do we need? But then what kind of conversations do we need to have at the institutional level, and then also at the program and individual levels? And so one thing that we thought we'd share too is that, let's say the task force has decided that these are the quality indicators or capstone attributes that they want to ensure that every program is aligning to. And this comes from one of the OPID high impact practices taxonomy. So we're taking it straight from them. We're just sharing the attributes because the taxonomy is quite full and it would take some time to read. But we want you to have this in mind as you're thinking about how can we have the institution implement these capstone attributes. What does this look like at the program level? What does this look like at the instructor level? What does this look like if you are a person charged with supporting faculty as they engage in this process? And that would be at like the faculty developer, educational developer level, or potentially another administrative position, such as like an assessment coordinator or specialist, right? And so, like I said, we're not a large group. So I think we can just do, I think Laura can hear me. We can just do one breakout room, and then we could even potentially pick which of these personas we wish to kind of take on, depending on, the positionality of all of us in the audience. And we can look at the heuristics that we developed. I will go ahead and try to share them in the chat. I'm going to have to stop sharing my screen to do that, though. Or at least I'm going to have to stop sharing that part of my screen. Sorry, this is a little wonky bit. We're just going to go with it right now. Okay. Okay, so I think we're ready for the breakout room so that everyone can engage.